Here are 3 ways that you can improve your Dynasty roster in the offseason. All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. And it's a Wednesday episode, so of course that means Matt Williamson is here. Check him out on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Go check out his new YouTube channel as well, Williamson NFL over there. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions about your Dynasty leagues. And this first question is a really interesting one that we got here from Josh. He wants to know, how do you change over your roster in the offseason? I'm really bad at trades that people will actually accept. So I need to change, not rebuild, but change over my roster. How do you do that, Matt?
So a couple tips I'll give you is don't look at your roster. Well, actually, every one of my leagues, I have a spreadsheet, and I do like a depth chart of who's most valuable to me all the way down. And I think that's a good way of looking at each position. You know, like, boy, I'm really weak here, or I can afford to get rid of this guy here. You know, so I build them so that they're very friendly to my eyes, you know, much like an NFL depth chart, honestly. But one thing I think a mistake that people make is, and an example of this is, I was in a rookie draft 2 weeks ago for Superflex League, and I have a wealth of quarterbacks, and I decided I'm trading Derek Carr. Well, nobody wanted Derek Carr, so I held on to him. Like, don't make yourself trade somebody. This guy has to leave my roster no matter what, and I'll take pennies on the dollar for him. That's where mistakes are made. But here's one of my favorite tidbits. I mean, obviously, I think it goes without saying, to rebuild your roster, to start over, rookie draft time is, you know, by far the most active time of any dynasty league. Everyone's going to be in and out of the site. Everyone's going to be making picks. There's going to be trades galore. People are cutting dudes. So really attack the week before the rookie draft and the rookie draft. But this is a fun thing I do as well, and it's really worked out well. I'm in 7 leagues, which is probably too many to really pay great attention to. So what I do is, like, during a downtime of the season, June or after the Super Bowl, I'll just camp out in one of those lobbies. I mean, I'll spend a whole week on one team, and anyone that happens to walk into my trap, I'll send them an offer. You know, like, somebody's in that room right now. I'll look in the chat room. I'll be like, that guy's available. He'll at least pay attention. I'll send him some kind of offer, and he might be like, I want nothing to do with it. Or he or she might just be like, we can start talks, you know? So I just kind of sit in a room and camp out for a week at a time, and then go to the next league, and then go to the next league, and just whoever walks in, I attack them.
Kate, what are your thoughts?
I love this approach. And I will say, I do think obviously the rookie drafts are of utmost importance. So if you are trying to, you know, reload a roster, that's obviously a very easy place to start accumulating as many rookie picks. But I do think the timing of kind of that entire process can be kind of critical. Like, Matt, for instance, your Derek Carr trade, you want him off your roster. Like you said, don't just settle for getting him off your roster.
Right.
Wait until somebody needs a quarterback. That's how you're going to maximize value when it comes to trades, when the injuries start to pile up in season. Like, the offseason might not be the time to just unload a guy from your roster just because you want him off your team. And I do want to, like, stress that, because I know this question is about off-season, you know, retooling, right? But I do want to stress that I don't think you should retool just for the sake of retooling, if the timing doesn't make sense. Because I think timing can be kind of one of these crucial leverage points that, yeah, nobody might want Derek Carr here in the offseason when nobody's talking about the Saints. They didn't really do a ton to add to their receiving room. It's like that's not the sexy time to trade for Derek Carr. The sexy time is when I don't have any other options at quarterback and I'm in desperate need, and suddenly you have leverage.
You're 100% right. And like in that league, I have 5 projected opening day starters, including Carr. So in a 12-team Superflex, other teams are going to be short. And when they actually think about submitting a lineup, they're going to be like, I don't really have a second quarterback to go. Hey, give me a second-round pick for Carr, which you would have laughed at during the rookie draft, you know?
I think it's important, Matt, what you said, to kind of prioritize your roster. Like, hey, here's my 5 cornerstone players, and everybody else is available. I'm going to try to move them to get a better asset. I think it's also important if you think you're in that middle spot, and Matt, you talked about this a lot. Like, if you're not one of the top 3 teams in your league, you're probably rebuilding, or you should be rebuilding, right? So try to move on from some of the assets that are going to depreciate in value basically as soon as the games start, right? And I think everybody knows the types of players that we're talking about. I just want to give one quick suggestion for me. I have the same thing, Matt. I'm in, I think, 6 dynasty leagues, and I'll do the same thing. I'll look at a team for a week, and what I'll do is I'll set a goal. Like, I want to improve my wide receiver position this week. Here are 8 names that I feel like would help improve my position, improve that spot. Let's go send trade offers for all 8 of those players and try to talk to the other managers so I can try to address this position rather than trying to rebuild your whole team at one time. It helps if you try to attack one position at a time or one spot. I feel like that's a little bit more successful of a strategy to retooling your team. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and you mentioned in this question, they said, I'm not a really good trade person. But even offering bad trades, as long as they're not ridiculous, at least gets the ball rolling. You know, like, you can offer a trade. Here's a future 6th-round pick for Bijan Robinson. But in the comments, you just say, hey, you interested in moving Robinson? You at least get that owner's attention. They might say, I have no interest whatsoever. Or, yeah, if you give me 2 future firsts. That's too expensive.
Well, I would even say, Matt,
right.
Sometimes it even helps before you offer a trade, just go to the manager and say, hey, what do you need? What are you looking to acquire? And then try to work out a deal that way. Sometimes that's easier than saying, hey, I want Bijan. This is what, this is what I'm offering. Right. I think sometimes that just helps conversation.
Point is asking, like, what are the other managers' goals? Like, you can blindly set a trade offer. I think it's a good conversation starter. But I do think the conversation of exploring these trades and finding good trade partners. Like, I'm going to be honest, there are times when I'm looking at another team's roster and I'm saying we're incompatible trade partners just based on our goals. Not every team is a good trade partner just because they have a player that you want. A good trade is one that mutually benefits both teams, makes sense for both sides. So, like, if you want Bijan Robinson, but Bijan Robinson is the cornerstone of their team, and they tell you they're not interested in starting a full rebuild, then yeah, you're not going to be good trade partners. Like, a good trade for me is when I take a look at their roster, I identify what I want, and then I take another look at their roster and I say, what is this team lacking? And what do I perceive to be their goal based on either their current depth chart or their projected starting lineup? Where are their greatest weaknesses? And do I have assets that can complement their needs just as well as they can complement mine?
It's many words of wisdom from the Godfather. I mean, it's just learn to think as those around you think, I mean, and it's, if you're only in a league or 2, you can really concentrate on the other teams in your league. They may not see their team the same way you do, but you can at least be like, they're going young. They're not going to take my old guy off me. You can figure it out.
All right, let's talk about some taxi squads in your dynasty league. Are they useful? Should you use them? We'll discuss that and more next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL. and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. We're getting really close to the NBA Finals. We know the Celtics will be there. We think the Mavs will probably be there, although the Timberwolves made it a little bit closer last night. If you want some odds on the Timberwolves to actually complete the 3-0 comeback, go check it out on FanDuel. Listen, I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Mavs are going to take care of business here in Game 5, but we'll see. That's what's so great about the NBA. Go visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, our next question here comes from Josh. He wants to know, what are your opinions on taxi squads? They seem like far more trouble than they are worth, but I'm open to hearing the upside. Matt, first of all, can you explain what a taxi squad is for Dynasty, and have you found them useful?
No, I can't. I'm a terrible leadoff hitter for this question because of all the leagues I've been in, I've never had a taxi squad. So
really,
I'm interested to learn. I assume it's like an NFL practice squad where I could pluck off your taxi squad, or how does that work? I mean, I don't exactly, I need coached up.
Kate, have you played in taxi squad leagues?
Yes. So the purpose of the taxi squad, basically think of it like a real NFL practice squad, right?
Okay.
Like that they're kind of segregated from the rest of your roster. The purpose of them is to stash rookies that you don't plan on rotating into your roster throughout their rookie season. So for instance, if I'm in a tight end premium league and I drafted Houston Texans tight end Cade Stover, okay? There is no way that I'm planning to actually be starting him at any point in his rookie season. The Texans just signed, Dalton Schultz to a 3-year, $36 million extension. Yeah, I don't think he's going to be relevant here in year one. Putting him on the taxi squad makes sure that he doesn't actually count against the player total on the rest of my roster. But once you move that player off, that, just like the regular practice squad, once you promote him to your standard roster, he does count. So it kind of gives you a little bit of extra depth, right? There's a little bit extra strategy there because maybe toward the end of the rookie drafts, if you have a couple of spots there, like maybe you accumulate some picks in the back half of your draft just to get some extra dart throws here. It's an opportunity for increased depth. I like the taxi squad. I never found them to be too much work. Once they're set, you forget it. And then, in the following off season, you kind of churn through and make sure everybody has a legal roster. But I love the taxi squad, but that's really more because I love increased depth, right? Yes. And I just love those extra shots at a potential lottery pick there late in the draft.
I'm going to add a couple more things, at least in the taxi squad leagues that I've been in. One of the reasons why it's pretty common in dynasty leagues is it helps maintain a competitive balance. So that way, if you have a roster that's full of young guys, I mean, you just don't have a lot of depth, and it ends up playing a big part in the regular season and the fantasy scores. Now with the taxi squad, you can stash 2, 3, sometimes as many as 4 guys on a taxi squad and keep your bench spots open for guys that you might actually play on a weekly lineup. It helps to keep the league a little bit more competitive. One of the rules that I've played in or I've had in my leagues when it comes to taxi squads, as soon as a player has been promoted from a taxi squad to your active roster, they can never go back to being a taxi squad player. So they're staying there as long as possible. And usually taxi squads or spots are only available for rookies. You can't put a Patrick Mahomes in your taxi squad spot and not have him count against your roster and try to tank that way. It has to be for rookies. I think like in this class, I think Kate Stover's a good example. Maybe somebody like Braylon Allen, who's pretty clearly blocked now, but you want to have him on your roster. I do see the benefit of them. And if you have one or two spots at the bottom end of your roster for a taxi squad, I'm open to it. I think it's generally a good practice.
Yeah, it sounds great. And the little I've heard of them in the past, it's not all that much extra work. I mean, in this question, they said, are they too much of a pain in the butt? Doesn't sound like it. I mean, I'm not the commissioner, but I think the settings aren't that difficult. So you answered most of my questions, but the only one I still have is, let's say Kate puts Stover on her practice squad. And I'm like, wow, I want him so bad. Can I pluck him off her practice squad or her taxi squad like the NFL can? Practice squad if he only goes to my immediate top roster?
I would say it depends on the league. Most of the leagues that I've played in, if you're on their taxi squad, they're untouchable. However, I do play in one
trade
league
for them just as you would any other asset.
You can't steal them like the Chiefs can steal someone off the Bears practice squad.
Dude, however, that would be kind of fun though.
I think that's kind of awesome.
A taxi squad like this.
But they have to put it on their immediate roster. You know,
I have played in one league where you can steal somebody off a taxi squad, but it costs you your next second round pick. So if you think there's a player that's being stashed that maybe shouldn't be stashed, you can give up your second round pick. The manager, the manager that has the player in the taxi squad can either promote them to their active roster or allow the trade to go through, which is interesting. It's almost like the tender in the NFL, right? So now you have a choice.
I love that.
That's cool.
I love that so much because then as the fantasy manager, you really have to make like, I'm going to be honest, for one of my rookie drafts this offseason where I have a taxi squad, none of the assets that I drafted, like I'm kind of in the middle of a rebuild. I'm not necessarily expecting a ton of year one production from like most of the guys I drafted, just because I drafted so many rookie picks that I just kind of threw them onto the taxi squad very haphazardly. Like, because really, like, take your pick. None of these guys are producing year one, probably. But that adds this extra element of like, I have to be a little bit cautious with who I'm placing on this practice squad. I really like that extra element. I'm going to be honest, I might go ahead and propose to enact that rule.
I think you should, but I would tweak it in one way, just hearing this for the first time. I'd make it a third round pick instead of a second. You know, like no one's going to give up a second for Stover or Jared Wiley, but a third might really be a lot more action. A second's pretty valuable.
Yeah, I will say this is in a 14-team league, so it's a little bit deeper. So if you think your team is going to be closer to the end, you're drafting what at 26, 27, 28. It's a little bit more palatable to give up that late second round pick. But yeah, I think these are all good suggestions. We'll talk more about taxi squads and other cool dynasty rules
or
this
even
offseason.
Like $200 fab dollars.
Exactly.
Something, whatever it is.
Whatever wants to. Yeah, exactly. We're going to get into more dynasty rules and changes that you should implement in your leagues later this summer. But we need to discuss Nico Collins and his new contract that he just signed on Tuesday. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are answering your Twitter questions today. We've got one about Nico Collins. This one from John. He wants to know, should Nico Collins see an increase in his dynasty value now that he has signed a long-term deal with the Texans? Matt, what do you think?
100%, but the value is already very high and rightfully so. And the tape shows that he is emerged. I mean, his yards per route run were top 3. He passes all the tests, the eyeball test as in breaking routes, fits in the offense, but money talks. And the fact that we pretty much know for a fact that Nico and Stroud are going to be together for the long term by NFL standards. I mean, that's if it's only 3 years, has immense value because I don't think Diggs will be back next year either.
Okay, what do you think?
We already had this conversation just last week, Marcus. If y'all haven't listened to our wide receiver this or that episode, go back. We talked about Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. We talked about Nico Collins and Tank Dell. And I made the case that like Nico Collins was already being very undervalued. looking at his most recent Dynasty startup ADP over on Dynasty League Football, Nico Collins is being drafted as the wide receiver 19, which I think is just absolutely disrespectful based on the production. He had one of the lowest catchable target rates among any wide receivers over his first 2 seasons, thanks to the turnover at quarterback in the post Deshaun Watson era. I don't think his 3rd-year breakout was a coincidence. He's got the prototypical NFL build. He's tied to a great quarterback. He's being drafted. Let's just play a little this or that. Okay. Both of you answer, Marcus. Let's see. Nico Collins or Devonta Smith?
Nico from you.
Nico Collins or Brandon Ayuk?
I go Ayuk.
I think Ayuk's a better football player, but Nico's in a better situation for fantasy points.
Okay. How about Jalen Waddle?
I probably would go Nico. That's close, though.
I'm going Nico. And guess what? Jalen Waddle's ADP, wide receiver 12. I think he's much closer to wide receiver 10 than he is wide receiver 20. Being drafted behind, let's do another one. Michael Pittman.
Nico.
DJ Moore.
Nico.
Where's
the breaking point? Yeah.
I love DJ Moore, so this one's hard for me, but I will side with Nico.
Hashtag go trade for Nico.
Matt, I have to ask you, since I'm such a big fan, does this hurt Tank Dell at all?
I don't think so. I think this is a great opportunity to buy on Tank Dell. I think Tank Dell's tape was also tremendous, and I was a massive skeptic on Dell coming out. I frankly just thought he was too small. Same thing with the Chan. There was a couple guys in last year's draft. I'm like, they're too small. I'm out. But the league is changing. Dell plays bigger than he is. He's great at the outbreaking routes. So I don't think him and Collins are at all redundant with one another. And they script their route tree so well and their route combinations. I think they both can thrive, especially if we get Diggs out of the way in a year.
To me, this just feels like the Texans love the pairing of Nico Collins and Tank Dell.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that CJ Stroud is he still has 3 years left on his rookie deal. One more if you include the 5th-year option. Tank Dell still has 3 years left. And this is a way just to ensure that Nico Collins and Tank Dell are going to be playing with each other for the next 3 years. And we saw last year when Nico and Tank were playing together, both of those guys ate, and both of them were producing at about the same level. I don't see why anything should change in the long term. Maybe this year with Stephon Diggs, he'll eat into that production a little bit, but I don't think I'm knocking Tank Dell down at all just because Nico signed a deal. I don't think it really should change anything here.
Yeah, I don't think their skill sets are redundant enough. The lack of overlap there and the proficiency at quarterback, we already know. We already know he can produce 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers. We'll see if he can make it a 3rd, but I think Tank Dell is going to be just fine.
And if you're a Dynasty, go ahead, Matt.
I said one prediction in this whole situation, though, is there's going to be an interview week 5 and then again in week 8 where Stephon Diggs is complaining about targets.
You think he's going to wait that long?
Well, maybe not. Maybe
the boldest part of that
yeah.
prediction, Matt, is the fact that it's going to be that long before we hear a peep.
He might figure it out in training camp. Yeah.
The last thing I want to say here about the Texans before we head out is if you have Nico Collins, who's a top 20 Dynasty receiver, you have Tank Dell, who's a top 25. You've got Stephon Diggs, who's still a top 30, 35 Dynasty wide receiver. You've got Dalton Schultz. How long before CJ Stroud kind of enters this conversation of a top 2, top 3 Dynasty quarterback? Matt, can he even get there with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes ahead of him? Like, is there any scenario where he jumps one of those 2 quarterbacks this year?
I don't think he runs enough.
What about like Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson, who are both being drafted ahead of him right now?
I think he's more like Burrow at his best day, which is great, but I just don't think the wheels are there for enough touchdowns on the ground or yardage on the ground. I mean, it's just too important in the game we play.
Is there can you talk yourself into it because of the age, because he's so young? Like, I get it. He doesn't have the upside because of the rushing of those guys, but because he's only 22, 23 years old, can you talk yourself into, hey, he's going to be playing for the next 12 years. I'd rather just get in, even if he has a little bit of a lower ceiling.
We had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I brought up Andrew Luck. Like should we just use a first-round Dynasty startup pick on Andrew Luck back in the day? No, because I can go get Derek Carr for nothing. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
I'm not saying Stroud and Carr are even comparable, but
by the way, you can't go get Derek Carr. Matt's trying to trade him in every single league right now.
All he
And
wants
Diggs
is
is the other
a
guy I've been dumping. Yeah.
All right. Good discuss. Good stuff. On tomorrow's show, we're going to discuss 3 wide receivers who are going to see their ADPs just skyrocket over the next 12 months. So make sure that you check out that. Go follow the show on Twitter, Locked On Dynasty. You can go follow us on YouTube. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Check out his new YouTube channel as well. You can follow Kate at Kate Majuk. Make sure you read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.